The single most audacious act of communication in American history didn't involve a bullet or a battle cry, but a gentle, almost imperceptible electric current. Imagine an entire continent severed, east from west, civil war looming. The fastest message delivery system in 1860 was the Pony Express, a heroic, breakneck relay of riders and horses that could, if weather permitted, get a message from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California in about 10 days. 10 days. That was the speed of information across a nascent empire facing its ultimate crisis. Now, imagine a miracle. A message traversing that same distance in a matter of minutes. This is the true, untold story of how a flimsy thread of copper and iron, the Transcontinental Telegraph, did more than just connect two coasts. It birthed the modern American financial, logistical, and political machine, made millionaires overnight, and ultimately created the world of instant communication we now take for granted. It is a story of astounding technological ambition, incredible personal fortunes made and lost on the flip of a wire, and a hidden war waged across the wilderness that defined the very nature of American power. The story begins not with the roar of a cannon, but with a whisper of electricity in the desert air, and the nearly bankrupt, relentlessly ambitious man who staked everything on a single impossible idea, Hiram Sibley. The Telegraph Wars and Sibley's Gambit. Hiram Sibley, born in 1807, was a man whose ambition vastly outweighed his capital. He was a small-time New York politician and businessman who had spent years in the messy, cutthroat world of early telegraphy. Before the Transcontinental line, the telegraph business in the U.S. was a tangled, chaotic mess of dozens of small, competing companies, each controlling a short stretch of wire. It was a logistical nightmare. A message from New York to St. Louis might have to be recopied and resent by hand by a dozen different operators, introducing errors and massive delays. Sibley's genius wasn't in invention, it was in consolidation. In 1851, he had merged several small lines to form the New York and Mississippi Valley Printing Telegraph Company. By 1856, after several strategic acquisitions, it became the colossal and still deeply unstable Western Union Telegraph Company. His goal? A monopoly. His method? Relentless, almost predatory expansion. But the true prize, the holy grail of communication, was the Pacific Coast. The nation was obsessed. From the gold rush of '49 onward, California was a golden magnet, but its riches, its gold, its commerce, its politics were agonizingly slow to reach the East. The need for instant communication became a national emergency as tensions between the Union and the seceding Southern states ratcheted up in the late 1850s. If California, with its vast mineral wealth and strategic Pacific ports, could be instantly linked to Washington, D.C., the Union's future was arguably secured. In 1860, the U.S. Congress, recognizing the crisis, passed the Telegraph Act, which authorized the Secretary of the Treasury to seek bids for the construction of a transcontinental line. The catch was the company had to guarantee completion in less than 2 years and maintain the line for a decade. The government offered a substantial annual subsidy of $40,000 for 10 years. For established, cautious telegraph magnates, the logistics were a death sentence. It meant stringing thousands of miles of wire across deserts, scaling the Rocky Mountains, and traversing the vast, unmapped, and hostile territory of the Great Plains, where Native American tribes saw the wire as a serpent of invasion. No one would touch it, except Sibley. Hiram Sibley, already drowning in debt from Western Union's earlier expansion, saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity to seize destiny itself.
He bought out the only other serious contender, the financially crippled Theodore Judah's California State Telegraph Company, and secured the western bid. For the eastern half, he partnered with his ambitious, ruthless cohort, Jephthah Wade, who would manage the construction from Omaha, Nebraska, west. Sibley had his government contract. He had a vision. What he didn't have was money. The panic of the first wire. The year is 1861. Lincoln is inaugurated amidst the threat of civil war. Sibley, in desperation, turned to the New York financial elite. He needed $500,000, an astronomical sum for the time, to buy wire, poles, and equipment. He was met with outright scorn. Bankers, cautious and fearing a nationwide collapse, refused. He said, "You're trying to cross a continent on a wire. It's an insane risk." Sibley, in a move that defined his character, leveraged his greatest asset, time. He knew the Civil War was coming. He knew that the moment the first wire connected the two halves of the nation, the value of instant communication to the Union government would skyrocket beyond measure. He didn't need the traditional banks. He needed risk-takers. He found one in Ezra Cornell, a former partner in Mechanical Genius who had been marginalized by Sibley but still held key Western Union stock. More importantly, he found a handful of investors who, though skeptical, were enticed by the possibility of a government lifeline in a time of national upheaval. A frantic, last-minute subscription drive raised the initial capital, barely enough to begin. Construction began in earnest in July 1861. It was a race against the calendar and against an unforgiving landscape. From the west, the California forces, using the shorter, more direct route from Sacramento, had the advantage of local lumber and better access to supplies shipped by sea. Their major challenge was the Sierra Nevada mountains. Workers had to haul the massive coils of iron wire, copper was too expensive and heavy for the main line, up treacherous icy slopes, often only able to string a few hundred feet a day. In the east, from Omaha, Wade's army of linemen faced the true wilderness. They had to cut, haul, and plant 15 to 20 poles for every mile. In the Great Plains, there were virtually no trees. Massive trains of wagons were organized to haul millions of wooden poles hundreds of miles from the forests of Minnesota, creating a logistical nightmare. The work was brutal, dangerous, and unrelenting.
But the speed was breathtaking. Workers, driven by Wade's relentless organization and the sheer panic of the looming deadline, set records. They averaged over 10 miles of wire strung per day, pushing 24 hours a day in shifts. Wagons hauled supplies, linemen climbed poles, and armed guards fought off bandits in skirmishes with local tribes who rightfully feared the invasion of their land. Every swing of the hammer, every planted pole was a race against the national clock. The financial stakes were stratospheric. Sibley had bet everything. He purchased thousands of miles of iron wire from a single manufacturer, nearly bankrupting them, and signed contracts for poles, insulators, and teams that he couldn't yet fully pay for. He was an entrepreneur running on pure faith and an ever-increasing mountain of debt, fully believing that the moment the wire was connected, the government's need would eclipse his liabilities. As the two crews pushed toward a common point in what would become Salt Lake City, Utah territory, the Civil War officially began with the Battle of Bull Run. Washington's need for instant, reliable communication with the vital California and Nevada gold and silver fields became an absolute, non-negotiable imperative. The moment of silence. On October 24, 1861, after only 3 months of construction, the two wires met in Salt Lake City, Utah territory. A crowd gathered around the local telegraph office, a crude wooden shack on the desolate frontier. The east and west coast lines were spliced together. The chief operator, James Gamble, stood ready at the key. The first official message, sent by Stephen J. Field, Chief Justice of California, was addressed to President Lincoln.
I congratulate you on the completion of the great work. May the Union be preserved. The message arrived in Washington, D.C. in less than an hour. The 10-day nightmare was over. The effect was not just logistical, it was seismic. The news of the completion traveled faster than any news in human history, instantly shrinking the continent. The following day, the New York Times declared, "The electric wire has made San Francisco a suburb of New York." But the true, surprising story is what happened next, in the shadowed boardrooms and on the floor of the stock exchange. The birth of Western Union and the first financial crash. Hiram Sibley's audacious gamble paid off instantly. The U.S. government, desperate for reliable intelligence, immediately became Western Union's single biggest customer, ensuring the promised annual subsidy was paid. The commercial value was even greater. Wall Street suddenly had real-time access to the California stock market, the gold and silver prices from Nevada, and the speed of trans-Pacific commerce. The economic consequences were astounding. With instant information, speculators could make massive, informed bets. The market became faster, more volatile, and infinitely more profitable for those with access. Western Union almost overnight went from being a heavily indebted regional player to the single most important communication company in the country. Its stock price exploded. Sibley, Wade, and their inner circle were instantly made multimillionaires, now commanding a monopoly on continental communication. They were, in effect, the founding fathers of the American information age, creating a technological and financial structure that would endure for a century. But the speed of information brought an unforeseen consequence: financial panic on an unprecedented scale. Before the telegraph, market rumors and political news took weeks to cross the country, softening the impact. Now, bad news, a major union defeat, a run on a California bank, or a sudden drop in gold prices hit Wall Street and San Francisco simultaneously, creating massive synchronized sell-offs. The telegraph line, meant to unify the nation, also unified its financial anxiety. The first telegraph-induced panic of the 1860s was a shocking realization that speed could be a terrifying weapon. The unseen army of women and children. The financial spectacle obscured another important, fascinating piece of the story: the telegraphers. The job of a telegrapher was one of the most intellectually demanding and stressful of the age. They had to be fluent in Morse code, possess incredible concentration, and manage the flow of official, commercial, and personal messages. The vast majority of these operators were not hardened male businessmen, but young women and even children. In the East, a lack of available male labor due to the Civil War, combined with a cultural belief that women's, quote, dexterity and patient attention made them ideal for the repetitive work of the key, led to a massive shift. By the mid-1860s, a significant percentage of Western Union's operators were female. These women became the silent, rapid-fire communicators of the Civil War, relaying troop movements, casualty reports, and presidential orders. For many, it was the first taste of meaningful, well-paid, non-domestic employment, a quiet revolution in the workforce happening one dot and dash at a time. Meanwhile, in the isolated and dangerous stations along the line in the West, the maintenance workers, the line riders, were often teenagers. Their job was to ride alone for hundreds of miles, inspecting the line for breaks caused by weather, animals. Bison often used the poles as scratching posts, or sabotage by Native American war parties, often used as arrow shafts or simply as an expression of resistance. The Union Army had to divert significant resources to protect the vulnerable wire, a demonstration of how the telegraph had become an existential strategic asset, a military target as crucial as any fort or railroad. The line was perpetually under threat. In 1864, during the Colorado War, entire sections of the line were torn down by Native American war parties, often used for arrow shafts or simply as an expression of